7 disciples are standing in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, pulling against a net so heavy they cannot lift it into the boat. Only minutes earlier, that same net had come back empty. They had worked through the darkness and caught nothing. Now, at the command of a stranger on the shore, it is suddenly full, not with a vague multitude, but with 153 large fish. That number has puzzled readers for centuries. Why? 153. Why would John interrupt a resurrection appearance to give us the exact total? Some have treated the number like a locked safe, trying combination after combination until a secret message appears. Others have dismissed it as nothing more than a fisherman's memory. But John does not give us the number by itself. He places it inside a carefully constructed scene. An empty boat, an unrecognized Lord, an obedient cast, a beloved disciple who sees Peter who plunges into the water, a charcoal fire, bread, fish, and a net that should have torn but did not. The meaning of the 153 fish is not found by pulling the number out of that scene. It becomes clearer when we watch what Jesus does with the whole catch. John is showing us that the risen Christ can fill the mission he gives his disciples, preserve what he gathers, and still remain the host who supplied the meal before they brought anything ashore. The precise number makes the abundance concrete and countable. The unbroken net makes it preserved, and the breakfast on the shore reveals where it all came from. To see that, we have to begin before the net is full. John 21 opens with 7 disciples together by the Sea of Tiberias, another name for the Sea of Galilee. Simon Peter says, "I am going fishing," and the others answer, "We will go with you." Readers sometimes interpret this as Peter abandoning his calling and returning to his old life. The text never actually says that. Fishing could have provided food, income, or simply something useful to do while the disciples waited. Jesus had already appeared to them after his resurrection, and they knew he was alive. Yet they did not know what the next stage of their lives would look like. That uncertainty matters. They stand between resurrection and commission, between what Jesus has accomplished and what they will soon be sent to do. They know more than they knew before the cross, but they do not yet see the shape of the road ahead. They enter the boat and work through the night. John reports the outcome in a brief, hard sentence. That night they caught nothing. For experienced fishermen, this is not merely disappointing. It is total failure in the very activity they know best. As day begins to break, Jesus stands on the shore, but the disciples do not recognize him. That detail fits a pattern in the resurrection narratives. Mary Magdalene initially mistakes Jesus for the gardener. The disciples on the road to Emmaus do not recognize him at first. Resurrection does not mean that Jesus has become unreal. He eats, speaks, cooks, and bears wounds. Yet recognition now comes as a gift. The risen Lord is truly continuous with the Jesus they knew. But he is not simply resuming ordinary life as though the cross had never happened. Jesus calls to them with a question that expects a negative answer. "Children, do you have any fish?" They answer with one word, "No." He does not need the information. The question makes them name the emptiness. Then he tells them to cast the net on the right side of the boat. From a purely practical standpoint, this sounds almost absurd. A few feet should not turn an empty night into an overwhelming catch. Yet they cast it, and suddenly they are unable to haul the net in because of the quantity of fish. The beloved disciple responds first, "It is the Lord." Peter responds in character. He puts on his outer garment, throws himself into the sea, and moves toward Jesus while the others bring the boat and the net behind him. One disciple recognizes, the other rushes forward. John does not force us to choose between perception and passion. Both belong in the scene. The sequence also recalls an earlier truth Jesus spoke to his disciples. "Apart from me, you can do nothing." In John 15, those words concern abiding in Jesus and bearing fruit. John 21 gives the idea of visible form. The disciples are not lazy, they are not inexperienced. Their boat, net, teamwork, effort, and knowledge are all real. But effort alone produces an empty net. When the voice of Jesus directs the same people using the same equipment in the same water, the result changes completely. This does not teach that every obedient act will produce visible numerical success. John is not handing Christians a technique for wealth, influence, or guaranteed results. The miracle belongs to a particular moment in which the risen Jesus is preparing witnesses for their mission. Its point is not that faith makes every project successful. Its point is that the mission of Jesus cannot be sustained as an independent human enterprise. The disciples will work, but their fruitfulness will come from Him. That brings us to the count. When the fish finally come ashore, John tells us the net is full of large fish, 153 of them. The Greek word for fish here is ichthyes, the ordinary word for fish, while the adjective megas tells us they were large. John is stressing not only quantity but weight. These were not 153 tiny fish that would fit comfortably into a basket. The catch is enormous enough to explain why 7 men struggled to manage it. The number has inspired an extraordinary range of interpretations. Augustine observed that 153 is the sum of every whole number from 1 through 17, because 17 can be divided symbolically into 10 and 7. He connected the 10 Commandments and the gifts of the Spirit, reading the catch as an image of the people gathered by grace. The mathematics is correct. 153 is what is called a triangular number. But the meanings assigned to 10 and 7 come from a later theological reading. John never explains the number that way. Another famous proposal is associated with Jerome, who wrote that ancient naturalists knew 153 kinds of fish. On that reading, the catch represents every kind of person gathered into the gospel net. It is a beautiful picture of worldwide mission. The difficulty is historical. Surviving ancient zoological lists do not securely confirm the claim that exactly 153 species were recognized, and Jerome wrote centuries after the Gospel. Other interpreters have used the numerical value of Hebrew or Greek letters to connect 153 with particular names, places, or phrases. A sophisticated modern proposal links the number to Ezekiel 47, where life-giving water flows from the restored temple, and fishermen stand beside waters newly filled with fish. That passage is genuinely relevant to John, because water, temple, life, and new creation are major themes in the gospel. Yet the specific numerical connection requires converting place names into numerical values, and John gives no signal that readers must perform that calculation. These interpretations do not all deserve equal confidence, and none has one broad agreement. That should make us humble. A possible symbolism should never be preached as though John gave us the key in the next verse. If the exact arithmetic has a coded meaning, the gospel has not made that meaning certain. But uncertainty about a hidden calculation does not make the number meaningless. And here is what most Christians miss. The hidden meaning is not primarily a code concealed inside the number 153. It is the trail John deliberately leaves around it, the empty net before the catch, the exact count on the shore, and the net that somehow remains unbroken. The number matters, but the scene surrounding it tells us why. John could have written many fish. Instead, he gives the tally. A precise count turns an impression into testimony. The disciples did not merely feel that the catch was large. They counted it. 153 fish were there on the shore. In a gospel that repeatedly presents signs so that readers may believe concrete detail matters, the number anchors the wonder in an event with weight, strain, wet nets, tired hands, and a total that fishermen could remember. Imagine 7 fishermen sorting a catch after a fruitless night. Counting is not an eccentric interruption. It is what people in that trade would naturally do. The fish are food and livelihood. The count measures what has happened. John does something similar when he tells us that the boat was about 200 cubits from land. The measurement does not have to conceal a code to make the account meaningful. It gives the scene the texture of remembered experience, yet John does more than record the number. He interprets its significance through the words placed around it. The net was full, the fish were large, there were so many, and despite the weight, the net was not torn. The hidden meaning most readers miss may therefore be simpler and stronger than numerology. The emphasis falls not on 153 as an isolated symbol, but on abundance that remains intact. That last detail would stand out to anyone who knew fishing. A net stretched by a huge catch can split. Fish can escape through the damage at the very moment the fishermen think they have succeeded. Here the abundance does not destroy the instrument carrying it. What Jesus provides, the disciples are able to bring all the way to shore. The Greek verb John uses for torn is schizo, a word meaning to split or divide. It is the same verbal family from which English gets schism. We should be careful not to turn that word history into a complete interpretation. John does not stop and say the net represents the church and its lack of tearing predicts perfect institutional unity. Christian history would make such a claim painfully difficult, but the image does fit the missionary direction of the scene. Jesus gathers a great multitude through the disciples' obedient work, and the catch reaches him intact. Earlier in John, Jesus says that when he is lifted up, he will draw all people to himself. The verb for draw there is helkio. John uses the same verb when Peter draws the net to land. This is more than a shared fishing image. At the cross, Jesus draws people to himself. After the resurrection, Peter draws the full net toward Jesus on the shore. The mission belongs to Christ, yet he dignifies his servants by involving them in it. That does not prove that every one of the 153 fish corresponds to a nation, a commandment, a spiritual gift, or a named individual. It does show why a full net naturally carries missionary significance in the final chapter of a gospel. In John 20, Jesus has already told the disciples, "As the Father has sent me, even so I am sending you." In chapter 21, that commission becomes a picture they can feel in their arms. Their future work will resemble this morning. They will act at Jesus' word, gather what he provides, and bring the result to him. The catch is therefore both historical and suggestive. It can be a real count and still participate in a larger meaning. Biblical narratives often work that way. A detail does not have to be invented in order to become symbolic, and a symbol does not become less meaningful because it arose from an actual event. The question is whether the symbolism grows from the text or has been imposed upon it. Here the text itself gives us enough. The disciples begin with nothing. Jesus speaks. They obey. The net fills. The catch remains whole. It is drawn to Jesus. But the most surprising detail is still waiting on the shore. When the disciples arrive, they see a charcoal fire with fish laid on it and bread. Before their 153 fish reach land, Jesus already has breakfast prepared. That single observation protects the whole passage from a dangerous misunderstanding. Jesus is not standing hungry on the beach, depending on the disciples to supply what he lacks. He does not need their success in order to become the host. He already has fire, bread, and fish. The one who filled their net is also the one who prepared their table. Then Jesus says, "Bring some of the fish that you have just caught." The wording holds grace and participation together. They are truly the fish you have caught. Their labor matters. Their obedience matters. Their hands must drag the net onto the land. Yet they caught those fish only because Jesus directed them, and they bring their catch to a meal he has already supplied. This is the shape of Christian mission. Christ does not recruit disciples because he is helpless without them. He gives them a real calling and receives real fruit from their work, but he remains the source of the fruit and the host of the feast. Grace does not erase human action. It places human action inside the prior action of Jesus. That is why both errors are so damaging. One error treats ministry as though everything depends on our strategy, stamina, charisma, equipment, or platform. It leaves us fishing through the night, believing that more effort must eventually force the sea to cooperate. The other error uses divine sovereignty as an excuse for passivity, as though the disciples could remain on shore because Jesus can provide fish without them. John gives us neither picture. Jesus commands, the disciples cast. Jesus fills the disciples' haul. Jesus prepares, the disciples bring. The meal is his gift, yet their catch has a place at his fire. The fire itself carries another layer. John calls it an anthrachia, a charcoal fire. That noun appears only twice in the Gospel. The first charcoal fire burns in the courtyard of the high priest in John 18. Peter warms himself beside it while denying 3 times that he knows Jesus. The second burns here beside the sea just before Jesus asks Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" John does not need to tell us that Peter remembers. Smell can reopen memory before words do. The crackle of charcoal, the early chill, the presence of servants, and the voice asking about his relationship to Jesus would have formed the setting of his worst failure. Now the risen Christ recreates part of that setting, not to humiliate Peter, but to restore and commission him. This means the enormous catch is placed beside the restoration of a failed disciple. The future mission will not be carried by people who have never broken under pressure. It will be carried by people whom Jesus meets, feeds, questions, forgives, and calls again. Peter's strength did not save him in the courtyard. His confidence collapsed before a servant girl's question, yet in John 21, Jesus does not discard him. After breakfast, he gives Peter a new form of work. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep. Feed my sheep. The fisherman must become a shepherd, but the principle remains the same. The flock belongs to Jesus, my sheep, just as the catch came through Jesus. Peter is entrusted with care, not ownership. This movement from fish to sheep prevents us from reducing the passage to numerical growth. The mission is not merely to gather crowds. Jesus cares for particular people who must be nourished, tended, and loved. The 153 are not an anonymous statistic in the hands of Christ. The exact count may even suggest the opposite. Abundance is not vagueness. The risen Lord can give a multitude without losing sight of its members. We should phrase that carefully. John does not explicitly say the 153 fish mean that Jesus knows every believer by number, but this idea coheres with the Gospel's portrait of Jesus. The Good Shepherd calls his own sheep by name. He knows his own, and his own know him. He speaks of one flock under one shepherd. So when John gives an exact number inside a preserved catch and then moves immediately to the care of Jesus' sheep, the story resists the idea that mission is about impressive totals alone. Numbers can make us forget faces. In John 21, the number does not stand apart from relationship. The catch is counted, but Peter is personally addressed. The net is full, but breakfast is shared. The mission is vast, but the command is intimate. Follow me. There is also an echo of the beginning of the disciples' journey. The Synoptic Gospels tell how Jesus called fishermen to become fishers of people, and Luke 5 records another miraculous catch after a night of failure. The accounts differ in setting and detail, so we should not simply merge them. Luke places the event near the beginning of Jesus' ministry. John places his catch after the resurrection. That difference is precisely what makes the comparison powerful. At the beginning, Jesus calls fishermen away from their nets into discipleship. At the end, the risen Jesus returns them to a net and shows what their mission will require. The first call says, in effect, "Come with me." The final call says again, "Follow me." But now Peter knows that following leads through failure, forgiveness, service, and eventually sacrifice. Jesus even tells Peter that one day he will be led where he does not want to go. John explains that this indicated the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. The abundant catch, therefore, does not promise an easy or triumphant career. The same Christ who gives fruit also calls his servant to costly faithfulness. Success is not the absence of suffering. The measure of Peter's life will not be how many fish he can count, but whether he follows Jesus. This corrects the way Christians can misuse the passage. It is tempting to turn 153 into a formula for expansion. Obey this principle, and your net will always be full. But the chapter will not allow it. Peter receives both abundance and a cross-shaped future. He is promised neither comfort nor control. He is promised the presence, provision, and command of the risen Lord. What then is the hidden meaning of the 153 fish? We can say three things with different levels of confidence. First, the most certain meaning is historical and narrative. The number measures a real, astonishing catch after a night of complete failure. Its precision gives texture to testimony and makes the abundance undeniable. Second, the words surrounding the number interpret it. These are large fish, there are many of them, and the net remains unbroken. The scene portrays abundance that is not lost while being brought to Jesus. Third, within the final chapters of John, the catch naturally points beyond breakfast to mission. The risen Christ has sent his disciples. He now shows that their work depends on his word, that he can make it fruitful, and that what is gathered belongs with him. The exact arithmetic may carry an additional symbolism. Perhaps John expected some readers to recognize one, but no proposed code should be stated with the certainty that belongs to the narrative itself. That conclusion may sound less dramatic than announcing that 153 secretly equals a particular nation, divine name, or map of salvation. In reality, it gives us something much stronger. It lets John's own emphasis speak. The miracle begins with emptiness, not because work is worthless, but because self-sufficiency must be exposed. It moves through obedience, not because casting on the right side is a universal technique, but because the disciples must learn to act at their Lord's direction. It ends in abundance, not to glorify their skill, but to reveal his provision. And the abundance reaches the shore intact because the mission he authorizes will not finally be defeated by the weakness of the people he calls. Then Jesus welcomes those tired disciples to eat. He does not lecture them while they are cold and hungry. He gives them bread and fish. The scene recalls the feeding of the 5,000 in John 6, where Jesus also takes bread and distributes it, along with fish, until the crowd is fed. In both scenes, Jesus is the provider. Yet John 21 adds the experience of failure and restoration. The Lord who fed the multitude now feeds the workers who could not fill their own net. For anyone who serves Christ, that order matters. You are first a guest at his fire before you are a supplier for his mission. You receive before you bring. You are fed before you are told to feed. Your work may be real and costly, but it never places Jesus in your debt. And if your net feels empty, this text does not give permission to pretend otherwise. Jesus asks the disciples whether they have fish, and they answer honestly, no. Faith does not rename emptiness as success. It listens for the Lord who stands nearer than we realize and obeys the next faithful command. If your net is full, the passage gives an equally necessary word. Count the fish if the count helps you recognize what God has done. Give thanks for visible fruit, but do not confuse the gift with the giver, and do not imagine that the table depends on what you carried to shore. Jesus was already there. The fire was already burning. The bread and fish were already in his hands. We return then to those 153 large fish lying on the shore. They are not a magical number waiting for clever readers to prove their ingenuity. They are the counted evidence of a night transformed by the word of the risen Jesus. They belonged to a catch too heavy for the disciples to manage easily, yet not one fish is said to be lost through a torn net. They arrived beside a meal the disciples did not create, and a fire where a broken apostle will be restored. Perhaps John embedded another numerical pattern in 153. Thoughtful interpreters can continue to examine that possibility, but we should not let speculation distract us from what the gospel makes plain. Christ is not absent from the disciples' work simply because they fail to recognize him on the shore. Their emptiness does not limit his abundance. Their past failure does not cancel his call. Their labor does not replace his provision, and their success does not transfer ownership of the mission to them. The net is theirs to cast. The catch is his to give. The people gathered are his to know. The servants are his to restore, and the table is his to prepare. That is the meaning worth carrying from the shore of Galilee. The risen Jesus does not merely send his people into the deep. He speaks the word that makes their work fruitful, preserves what he gathers, and waits on the shore as their provider and Lord. Which detail in John 21 changes the way you see this story most? The empty night, the 153 fish, the unbroken net, or the charcoal fire? Share your answer in the comments, and may the grace of the risen Christ steady you in every work he gives you to do.